Hello, wonderful people of the internet. My name is Matthew. Welcome to Matthew Talks About American Literature and More. And today we're going to be talking about what is arguably the most famous American novel, Moby Dick, and why I didn't finish it, but why I will give it another chance. So, as I'm sure almost anyone who knows anything about literature knows, Moby Dick is about Captain Ahab who sails a ship with the narrator Ishmael, who is on this quest for revenge against this one famous white sperm whale, Moby Dick, who has taken his leg and sees and has this almost preternatural revenge, monomaniacal drive to hunt this whale and kill it. That's a story I'm sure almost everyone here knows everything they needs to know about the story and the premise, with the famous line, "Call me Ishmael." This is a buccaneer sea adventure, and it has gained the reputation as possibly the greatest American novel ever written, and one of the greatest American novels of all time. One of the greatest novels in English, and one of the greatest literary works ever. Now, I don't agree with that. Now, I'll be clear that while I do in some ways understand why this book has become so iconic and so lauded, and it being so highly lauded does make me want to try it again. Probably not until I give it at least one good year, and I'll get into the reasons why that is. But let me start with the good things about this book. I'll say this, the first third of this book is fairly engaging. Ishmael is a very likable, very engaging narrator, and he has a fairly nice narrator voice. He has a very quirky personality. He has a very touching relationship with one of the members of the Pequod, Queequeg, which he's also a very original character as this Polynesia type cannibal sailor, but who also has a really loving brotherly spirit with Ishmael, and that's all fine, well and good. The first act does have some very nice details about the island of Nantucket and the surrounding New England area, and why Ishmael in particular wants to seek out a voyage on the sea on this whaling expedition. I'll also say this, that up to the point I've read, which in my edition I got to the point page 309 in my edition that has 681 pages. Up to that point, I think what we do get of Ahab is decent. It's not great, but it's not bad. He's a fairly engaging character. Now, one of the things I also do like about this book is that it does tend to does get you into whaling in a very passionate sense. You can tell that Melville, who did have a history when it comes to sailing and various forms of shipping in New England, does try very hard to make you care about whaling. However, now this is where we get to the negatives. Ishmael and Melville, since he's writing this book, does go overboard into the biographical and encyclopedic aspects about whaling. That's not to say that I don't appreciate Melville trying to give full context to the subject he's writing about, and you can tell that he did learn about the stuff in great detail. But I feel that, one, it went way too overboard, and second of all, I felt that this is something that could have been relegated to an appendix. And that's another thing that I want to say, that like this edition doesn't have any appendix, doesn't have any notes. So especially if you're unfamiliar with various terms of whaling terms or shipping terms, like what is a mast or what is a stub or the front or port or starboard, things like that, I'd recommend getting an edition with an appendix, because otherwise you're going to be lost. Preferably one that has like some pictographic images of like the makeup of ship, or of a whale or something like that, because I think that would be very helpful. And second of all, well, not second of all, something that I also think that needs to be acknowledged is that while this is technically a book from the Romantic era of literature, and in many ways it does have that hallmarks, I think people go into it with the wrong expectations. Like when people read the Scarlett Letter, the works of Emily of the Bronte sisters, Jane Austen, even the works of Charles Dickens, Dumas, anything like that. Like, and don't get me wrong, to some extent Melville does belong in that category, which is something I'm going to get into later. But I think Moby Dick should be better understood as a modernist and postmodernist novel written in the 1850s. This is not a book that should, I'm not saying should, but it's more comparable to a book written by these modern titans, or I don't want to say titans, but these highly lauded works of literary fiction like Thomas Pynchon, David Foster Wallace, even writers like Faulkner, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce. Let me think of another one. Don DeLillo, stuff like that. And where it's clearly this is about a very niche topic. It tries to get into that topic very well, and tries to use all kinds of different stylistic techniques, like writing things in kind of in plays, in a play format, like this person says this person says this, not in a kind of typical dialogue format, trying to imitate a certain other prose styles and trying to go through all these long encyclopedic digressions. Now, I'll say this, the digressions when it comes to like whaling in itself were all right in and of themselves. And what I mean by that is that if you handed this, like that, a chapter about whaling from this book to me, I would say like, okay, like this seems like kind of niche and kind of archaically written, but I would say this is a pretty decent representation of something that you might find at SeaWorld. I've never been to SeaWorld, but you know what I mean. Like a little flyer that, you know, you might get at a zoo that explains a little bit about this animal and what they are and how they work. And I think that works fine in and of itself. But in my opinion, it really interrupts the flow of this book. And given how long and complex this book tries to be, I don't think those encyclopedic passages were necessary. In addition, and while I haven't read through a lot of the spark notes, and again, I also think this is another reason why you should get an edition with notes or like a back-end catalog with all kinds of references or word choice. What kind of prose style Melville was going after? Because it seems to me, and this is from what I've heard, that Melville was trying to imitate Shakespeare, because there are some passages here that kind of, this doesn't sound like something even someone from the 1850s would write. This sounds like something that Shakespeare would write, with the these and thous and stuff like that. And to some extent, I appreciate that kind of stylistic choice. But one, I think it should be pointed out that as much as I haven't read a lot of Shakespeare, I remember reading him like 10 years ago, and I will get to him, that I think I more often than not get annoyed when authors deliberately try to harken back to a previous style of writing, especially a style of writing that is by our standards archaic. No disrespect to Shakespeare, but Shakespeare was writing in his traditional 16th century time, and of course he had his own style, but unless your book is set in the 1600s, which this is not, I assume this is around the 1850s, like they don't give, at least from where I am, they don't give a precise date. I don't really like the idea of your characters talking in a much more intricate fashion than you should. And also, I think that there's something needs to be pointed out, is that Shakespeare, at least from what I've read, all of his works are incredibly short. Now, I get they have been analyzed to death, but I mean, like, at least just really, like, when I really quickly Googled, like, hey, this sounds like Shakespearean prose, but like, why like, why am I feeling like this is not good? Like, I have to trudge through it. And the reason is one of the reasons is that even Shakespeare's longest play, Hamlet, is only like 30,000 words. Like, you could fit that in like 150 pages or in 200 pages. And it feels like Melville's attempt to drag out Shakespeare's poetic style in a prose style that's not that engaging, especially when there's not a lot of, when the plot is not that engaging, given that once the ship goes out to shore, there's not a lot of, like, like, even if the ship may be moving throughout the entire ocean, it's not moving through a discernible space. Like, you may, like, it's like walking through town, there's a bunch of buildings and landmarks. But when you're sailing through the ocean or flying up above in the sky in a plane, there's not that many landmarks. It's not as interesting. And that's really the main reason why I chose not to finish this book. Now, I will say, I'm an avid Goodreads user, and I have heard from people I respect that have similar views, that the first third of this book is decent. And I haven't read, the last 20% or so is incredible. It's riveting. But I am aware that there was a lot between those two that is supposedly, and from what I've read so far, pretty boring. Mostly the encyclopedic sections and the sections where Ishmael is really in his own head, if that makes sense. His dictation may be fine, but I'm not that interested in his own narrative dictation. So I think, at least with this edition, I've chosen to set this book down with the hope of returning to it in a year or two. If you guys have read it and you think, hey, like, I'm being unfair to it, I should try to read it again, you guys may be able to talk me into it. But at this time, I'm pretty confident that me and Moby Dick are going to be, we'll appreciate each other from a distance, if that makes sense. So that was Moby Dick for me. I didn't enjoy it. I will say this, like, if I do read enough, not just from you guys, but from other places, like, hey, I will power through the end of that book and, like, give you guys my updated thoughts. But till now, I think I'm pretty confident that Moby Dick is going to be on the shelf for a while. And overall, I don't think it's fair for me to grade it, like, given that I didn't finish it. But I think I'd give this a 2 out of 5. This seems like one of those books that even avid readers and even people who read a lot of classics are very split on. It's not a book that, like, even for your, like, oh, like, you have that one person you know at a bookstore, or that one person you know from your job who reads a lot, that you can just give this to and they'll read it and then be, oh my goodness, that was amazing. It's not that kind of book. And, you know, that's okay. It's earned its reputation. It doesn't need me to say it's good or bad, but those are my thoughts on it. One other thing, I've decided that I'm not going to do a review of Uncle Tom's Cabin at this moment for the Great American Novel series. A couple of reasons for that. One is kind of selfish. It's long, and I want to get a Little Women review. I have Little Women on my shelf, and frankly, I think I'll enjoy that book much more than Uncle Tom's Cabin, which I hear, while it's historically significant, is not superb on a literary level. So that's kind of my own selfish readership bias on why I don't want to read that book right now and put it off. But also, I feel that since it's such a important book in American history historically, like, not just in a literary, but like in terms of American history with the Civil War and its lead up, I feel like that book, I should do an episode on it just to, since it has earned its place in, like, the canon of American literature, but I don't feel I can do that video just by reading it, telling you how I feel, and giving my thoughts on it. I think that book deserves more research than just the book, if that makes sense. Also, probably tomorrow or the day after, I'll be doing a review of a book that I don't hear enough people talk about. It's from an author that has written a book that was adapted into a movie that is pretty famous. But I just finished that book, and I'm tempted to include it in the Great American Novel series, but it's so good, and not enough people are talking about it, that I think, selfishly, I want to be the kind of person that discovered that book, but I just want to review it when it's fresh in my mind. You'll see in a few days. I consider it one of the greatest novels of the 20th century, and one of the greatest American novels, at least that I've read, of all time. So, hope you're having a good day. Hope you're reading good stuff. Hope this video finds you well. And happy reading. Have a good night.